Hilchis Mikvaos Perek Achadasa. Kvar biyarnu shenetilas yadayim utfilasim b'divrei sefer. We learned already in Hilchis Brachas, the whole musig of yadayim needing netila and tefillah is a drabanan. In other words, minatera, either the person is completely tamei or the person is completely torah. This musig that the yadayim should become tamei and the rest of the person is torah, and therefore you have to work on taras hayadayim either through netila or tefillas yadayim. All of this is only a din drabanan. That's one thing that kvar biyarnu. And also, the yadayim shetzichis tefillah, yadayim shetzichis tefillah. Now, normally, yadayim lehegdish tzrichis tefillah. You could only be toivel yadayim. There's no musig of netilas yadayim lehegdish. Mashaykin letruma lechulin, you can have netilas yadayim. So, if yadayim shetzichis tefillah, if you have to be toivel the yadayim, it's a drabanan. But if you have to be toivel the yadayim drabanan lehegdish, so then ein matbilan neisel b'mikvah koshi sheyesh be'arboim so. It has to be a proper mikvah that has arboim so. Shebemokim she'odem tevel bei kelim v'yadayim tevel. You could only be tevel kelim v'yadayim in a place where odem tevel bei. We mentioned that other Rishonim hold differently. The Raivad argues, and he holds that the din of arboim so only is by a odem. Mashenkin kelim doesn't have to have arboim so. Now that is a yadayim doesn't have to have arboim so, which the Alter Rebbe brings that sometimes you can be mekel according to the shita. But I'll call upon the shittas Rambam is that tefillas yodayim has to be dafkin arboim so. That's so. If it's yodayim shetzrichas tefillah, you have to be matbel in a mikvah kosher where a person can be table. Avol yodayim she'ein tzrichas el netila bulvad. If we're talking about yodayim which only needs netila, for example, it's lechuln or letruma, so it doesn't need tefillah. So it's azoi imid bilon b'mikvah teirim. If you table it in a main mikvah teirim. However, if in a mikvah teirim, however, v'mid bilon b'mayim shuvim, if you were table it in mayim shuvim, bein bekelim, bein bekarkois, whether you were table it in the kelim or in karkois, lei toaru yadav. There's netila helps. Tvila definitely helps. Tvila definitely helps. But lepeil tvila would only help in a mikvah. It bilon b'may mikvah is teirim. Masha'in kein netilas yadayim could only work if you're noitul yadav. Noitul means you wash your hands, you take it from a keli and you pour it onto your hands. But you can't be toivel in mayim shuvim. Is nachamol. Avol yadayim shein tzrichis el netila bolvat. So lepeil imid bilon b'may mikvah teirin. If you have bilon b'may mikvah teirin, because tefillah also works. However, v'imid bilon b'mayim shuvim, bein bekelim bein bekarkois leitaru yadav, ad sheyiplu amayim shuvim min hakeli al yadav. It has to be that from the keli it's going to come al yadav. Shein neitl yadayim, the netilas yadayim has to be min hakelim, and it has to come from a keli, not from a thing that's not a keli. And also it has to be mikeach neisen. In other words, if it pours out of the keli without a koyach neisen, let's say if it was a nefan of gram or whatever the Rambam says, the tziyurim in Hilchas Brachas, it has to be pouring from a keli through a neisen. It has to be someone pouring it from the keli. It has to be min hakelim u'mikeach neisen. Be'shebiyanu be'Hilchas Brachas. Is bekitzer. The nekudas advarim is that the whole musig until yadayim tefillah is a drabanan. Lepel yadayim shetzichas tefillah have to have tefillah dafkin a mikvah which is kosher litpul bei. Now yadayim she'ein tzichas netila. So the pashtus haloshen is lepel if you a table it is good. Mitbilim b'mei mikvah teirim, but lepel you can't be table it in a mayim shuvim. Even though you could use mayim shuvim for netila, but you can't be table in a mayim shuvim. Not mayim shuvim that's in a keli, and not mayim shuvim that's in a karka. There's two options: either to be table it in a mikvah, or to make netila that says in a mikvah, which means not mayim shuvim, or to make netila from a keli and bekechnis. That's this din. Masha'inkin to go ahead and be table it in mayim shuvim, either why the mayim shuvim is actually in a keli, or even in a mikvah which comes from mayim shuvim, that wouldn't be kosher. Now lepel the lashon Rambam is avol yadayim shein tzichas el netila b'vad im bilon b'mei mikvah teirim. Now from that it's not so clear, but others are medayik that the pshat is that the Rambam is saying that you don't have to have mamish a mikvah kshera like the Rambam said before. Before he said ein matbil neis el mikvah kosher sheyesh be'arboim so shemakom she'adam tevel bei. That's where you could be table the kelim and yodayim. Masha'en came b'nigeya the yodayim which only needs netila. You could be table in a mikvah as long as the mikvah is not a mikvah of mayim shuvim. But Masha'inkin, if this mikveh l'mashal has the psul that Shlei Shaluga Mayim Shuvim went into, so that psul wouldn't apply to Tfilas Yodayim Shetzarech Natila. In other words, Tfilas Yodayim Shetzarech Natila would be able to be tovel in a mikveh which wouldn't be kosher la'adam, but on the condition that the mikveh shouldn't be a mikveh of Mayim Shuvim. It's a mikveh of Meik Shamim, but it has Mayim Shuvim in it. It's not so clear in the Rambam. That's how some people learn Pshat in the Rambam. That when the Rambam was saying, "Al Yadayim Shem Tzichas Al Natila Bulvad," in Mitbilam b'mei mikveh terim, it means in a mei mikveh, not the mei mikveh that we spoke about before, where it has to be 100% kosher. Over here, it has to be a mei mikveh, but it can't be a Mayim Shuvim. It has to be a mei mikveh, which is not Mayim Shuvim. But it could be a mei mikveh, which has Mayim Shuvim mu'urav in it, which that hisarvus of Mayim Shuvim would takapassel it in order to for a person to go. So in other words, that din, that ein noitel tevon liyodayim ela b'mikveh, which is kosher litbil bay, that's going on when you bring tevel liyodayim for hegdish. Masha'inka, when you're being tevel liyodayim to eat chulin, so then you could be tevel liyodayim in something which ain't kosher litbil bay. But on the other end, it's not mayim shuvim, it's mei mikveh, it's meik shamim, but it has mayim shuvim mu'uriv b'zeh. Halacha beis. Kol ha-choitzitz b'tfilah, choitzitz b'yodayim. Anything that's considered a chtzitza by tefillah, which we learned about, is considered a chtzitza b'yadayim. Bein b'tfilosan, whether you're being tovel the yadayim, bein b'netilosan. And v'chol ha'eila l'midas ha'mikveh ketit ha'nirik. And there's anything that's considered a tziruf to the memsa of the mei ha'mikveh, like mud, which could be spilled, which is liquidy, is oila l'shir ha'revish netel me'yodayim. That could also be part of the revius which you do netils yadayim with. And then there's another din, v'chol hanetel yada, when a person washes his hands, is tzarech l'shafshir. He has to rub his hands one on the other, and that's in order to take away the zuama, if there's left any zuama. So even though it's not a chtzitza, but mitzad nikiyas, so a person should be mishafshir yada. And also it's brought down in Shulchan Aruch that you dry your hands also for that same reason, because when your hands are still wet, so it's mos. So by drying your hands, you're taking that liquid and any other residue that was on your hand, and that's going off by drying your hands. Halacha Gimel. Hanetel shtei yodav l'truma. When a person washes his two hands l'truma, is sarich lazer v'litul pam shniya b'mayim shniyim. He has to go ahead and wash his hands a second time. And the reason for that is, kedei lahaser hamayim shal gabav. Whereas the water, his hands were tummy. Now the water that went on his hands the first time was metayer's yodayim, but that water itself became tummy. That water was being metayer the yodayim, but the water itself became tummy. Now you have tummy dika water on your hands. So in order to get that water, which became tummy from your hands, off your hands, so therefore you have to wash your hands a second time. Kedei lahaser hamayim shal gabav, shehamayim shenotel bem tchila, beheman nikroi mayim rishenim. The first waters that he washed his hands with is nitmu biyadav. They became tummy. And lefichach, that's this din. So memelo, so the first time a person washes his hands with truma, so that water becomes tummy. And memelo, he has to wash his hands a second time. Lefichach, im nafal kika shel truma letecha mayim shenotel bem yadav tchila, is nitma. Since we're saying that the first water that he washed his hands with became tummy, so if that water that he washed his hands with, truma touches it, so it becomes tummy, so the truma becomes tummy. However, when a person washes his hands the second time, and the purpose of washing the hands the second time is to get rid of the water that he had in the first time, but that water doesn't become tummy, because that's not really being metayr yadayim tmeis, it's just getting rid of the residue of that water, and that water vices becomes bottled to the water that he's washing, is therefore lei nitma. So memela, so again, so there's, when a person washes his hands with truma, he has to wash once and then a second time. The first time, the water that he washed with becomes tummy, so therefore there's leftover tummy water on his hands, and therefore the second time he's getting rid of that water, and memela, so comes out the water that he washed his hands with the first time is tummy, and therefore if truma touches it, the truma becomes tummy. The water that he washes his hands with the second time is not tummy, and therefore if truma touches it, it doesn't become tummy. Now, if Lepel, he washed his hands, side the Rishenim and side the Shneim, fell in the same place, and V'nafel Sham, Kiko Shel Truma, and the Kiko Shel Truma fell into that water, is Nitma, so that quicker becomes tummy, because Lepel, there's the Maim Rishenim are tummy, and Memela, so the water, even though there's Maim Shneim there as well, but the Maim Rishenim are tummy. Now, notel is harishenim. A person washed his hands, and lepel after he washed his hands is nimtza al yod of davar chetzitz. He found that there was a chtzitza, so mele that really washing wasn't oil for him. And then v'hisire, and then he took off the chtzitza, and v'notel is hashniim, and now he washed his hands a second time. Is hareyod of tmeis kshayu. His hands are still tummy. It means that it's still tummy. It means to say that he doesn't even have mayim rishenim. L'chura the mayim rishenim that he had didn't work for to be matari yoda because he had a chtzitza. Now he took the chtzitza off and now he put mayim shneim. So l'chura the mayim shneim should l'chol hapachas be mayim rishenim. So we say no. She'ena mayim hashneim mitarim ella hanishim and mayim rishenim al gabi yodav. The whole inyan of mayim shneim is only to take off the mayim rishenim shal yodav. And since when you poured the mayim shneim, your intention was als mayim shneim, and mayim shneim is only to take off the mayim rishenim shal gabav. So therefore, it can't be in place of mayim rishenim. So in other words, mayim rishenim has to be with kavanah, and tils yadayim has to be with kavanah. So you have to be kavanah to make them tils yadayim. So when a person takes yodav mayim rishenim, so he hasn't zinin to make the tils yadayim. Now when a person does mayim shneim, he doesn't have an intention to do Netilas Yadayim. His intention is to take off the Mayim Rishenim. So now this person that the Mayim Rishenim wasn't really good because there was a Chtzitza. And then he poured the Mayim Shneim only to take off the Mayim Rishenim. So the Mayim Shneim didn't have a din of the Netilah because it was only there to take off the Mayim Rishenim. So now he has to go ahead and wash again Mayim Rishenim in order to make the proper Netilah. And then again to take Mayim Shneim, to take off those Mayim Rishenim. Halacha Daled, Hayadayim mistamis umistaris adaperik. The din of tumas yadayim, now there is a taris yadayim is only adaperik. Adaperik is machlekes, the Rif, and the Rashi. What adaperik is? Rashi holds that adaperik means until the end of the etzbois, which means the knuckles. Only the etzbois, there's din of tumas yadayim and taris yadayim. Masha'inki in the Rif holds that it's until the wrist. The Rambam doesn't write clearly really what adaperik is. The Rambam just writes adaperik. And Shulchan Aruch is brought down that you have to be machmer, that it should be until the wrist. But I'll call upon Hayudayim, Mistamis, or Mistaris Adaperik. Ketzat. Notos or Rishenim Adaperik. If the Mayim Rishenim was Adaperik, and the Notel HaMayim Ashnim Chutz Leperik. And the Mayim Ashnim, now we learned the Mayim Ashnim are Mitayir, the Mayim Rishenim. Now that Mayim Ashnim, the Mayim Rishenim were Adaperik. So that Mayim is Tomei. Now the Mayim Shneim went over the Mayim Harishenim, and it also extended and went out from Adaperik till Chutz Leperik. So now you have the Mayim Harishenim were Techa Perik, and the Mayim Shneim were also on top of that Mayim Harishenim, but it extended also from there, it extended to Chutz Leperik. Then the Chazru Michutz Leperik Liyodi. Then these Mayim Shneim, after they washed the Mayim Harishenim and extended Chutz Leperik, so now these Mayim went back to the Leperik. So the din is at a yod of Teres. Why? Shamayim Ashnim Terim. The Mayim Ashnim is Teir. There's the Mayim Ashnim Bechlal is Teir. The Mayim Ashnim, when it's Metar, the Mayim Rishenim is Teir. And the fact that the Mayim Ashnim went Chutz Leperik, even though the Mayim Rishenim didn't go Chutz Leperik, but Lepel Chutz Leperik is not Metami. So in Mele, that part that's Chutz Leperik is not going to cause that the Mayim Ashnim should be Tami, so be Kitzer. So the Mayim Rishenim was Metar the Yadayim, Lepel that Mayim Rishenim became Tami, and now the Mayim Ashneim were Metar the Mayim Rishenim. The fact that these Mayim Ashneim also extended Chutz Leperik and then went back L'Techa Perik is L'Mayil of L'Merit. That's in the case where the Mayim Rishenim were Techa Perik and the Mayim Ashneim were Chutz Leperik. What about Fakert? Notlu is Harishenim Vashneim Chutz Leperik. He washed side the Rishenim Chutz Leperik, and then he washed also the Shneim Chutz Leperik. So in other words, he washed his hands, the Rishenim was on the place where the Yadayim Amatami, which is Techa Perik, and it extended also Chutz Leperik. So that Mayim Rishenim were Tummy. That Mayim Rishenim were Tummy because it was Techa Perik and Chutz Leperik. It extended Chutz Leperik. Now the Mayim Shneim are Doch Metayr the Mayim Rishenim. But the Maisa is there's another din that the Mayim Shneim could only be Metayr Mayim Rishenim only Techa Perik. So there's two dinim over here. One din is that only Techa Perik becomes Tamei, and only Techa Perik needs to have Netila. And then there's another din that the Mayim Rishenim, which becomes Tor through the Mayim Ashneim, could only become Tor Techa Perik. It can't become Chutz Leperik. So therefore, as a result of that, comes out this din. Not also rishenim vashnim chutz leperik. He washed side the rishenim and side the shnim chutz leperik, which means it's another side the teicha perik and side chutz leperik, and it extended from the teicha perik to chutz leperik. Now the chazru liyadi. Now the mayim shnim were chazru liyadi. You know, he washed the mayim rishenim, teicha perik and chutz leperik, and then the mayim shnim again he washed over it. So he covered the entire mayim rishenim, including the mayim rishenim, which were chutz leperik. And now the mayim shnim went back. So the din is so nitmas yodi. So nitmas yodi. Why? Shahamayim rishenim shechutz leperik. Idach nitmo machmas yodi. That mayim rishenim became tummy. The ena mayim shnim mitar mayim shechutz leperik. So the mayim that was chutz leperik is the mayim rishenim. That's like the mayim rishenim which were chutz leperik. Notice the mayim rishenim which started teicha perik. Notice he washed the teicha perik as well, and it extended to chutz leperik. So that mayim rishenim remained tummy, and the mayim shnim wasn't able to be matired. So now when the mayim, after he did the mayim rishenim and shnim, and both of them were chutz leperik, the mayim went back into the yad. So that mayim remained tummy, and since that mayim remained tummy, so memelis mitame yadayim. So it says ve'ena mayim hashnim mitar mayim shechutz leperik. Lefisha chazru. Hamayim shechutz leperik liyadi is temur. So again, when the mayim rishenim were only tocha perik and only the mayim shnim were chutz leperik is not a problem, because the mayim rishenim became tur, and the fact that the mayim shnim were chutz leperik is not negeh. Masha'enken, if the mayim rishenim were also chutz leperik, so even though the mayim shnim were also chutz leperik, but the mayim shnim could only be matar the mayim which are teicha perik, and it can't be matayim the mayim which are chutz leperik. Halacha. Notless rishenim liyadi achas. He washed one hand with mayim rishenim, and then v'nimlach v'notless hashniim l'shtei yodav. And then he went ahead and washed the two hands together with the shneim, with the second water. So the din is now the yadayim atmeis. Why? Shashniim is the chmetamem machmas hayad shli nitl b'mayim rishenim. The shneim, normally when there was mayim rishenim, so the shneim caused that the mayim rishenim should become tar. It causes the tar of the mayim rishenim. But over here, since there's one yad, he's washing both hands together. So one of these yadayim he's washing it for the first time. So Mele, that shneim is becoming tamei machmas hayad shelei nitl b'mayim rishenim. And now, so that water becomes water that's tamei. And now, since he's washing both hands together, is the chayzin, that water is the chayzin metamei the yad hashniya. Is metamei the yad hashniya, which he did wash. He washed one hand, and now he washed both hands together with the mayim shneim, So normally mayim shneim is metami, the yad which had mayim rishenim. So if he would have washed the one hand with mayim rishenim, then he would go ahead and wash that hand with mayim shneim, so that wouldn't be a problem, like we'll learn. Mashenkin over here, since he washed both hands with the mayim shneim, so that mayim shneim became tummy. And since that mayim shneim became tummy, so memela fakert, it doesn't affect the tara on the Yad Yerishena, it affects a tumah on the Yad Yerishena. And now both hands, need Sai Mayim Rishenim, Sai Mayim Shneim. That's what he's saying. Shashneim, Mistame Machmas Hayat Shalilitna B'Mayim Rishenim, and now V'chezim B'Tam Hayat Shneim. Now, Notlus Rishenim L'Shnei Yad. What happens if you wash both hands with both the Mayim Rishenim on both hands? So now you have two hands which were washed with Mayim Rishenim, and the pale is Notl Hashneim L'Yadi Achaz. And then he went ahead and washed one hand with the shnia. Is an achas teira. That achas is teira because lepel that achas had mayim rishenim, mayim shneim. The fact that the other hand doesn't have mayim shneim, that doesn't cause that the one that did have mayim rishenim and shneim shouldn't be tar. Now not till yodi achas, he went ahead and washed one hand, and v'shif shifa b'chaverta, and then he went and he rubbed it with the other hand. Is nitmo amayim shaleh machmas chaverta shalei nitla. Since that other hand is tummy. And here, this hand is wet, and mele, so the mayim which is on the hand that was washed becomes tummy from the hand that wasn't washed. And mele, once the water, the water which on that hand becomes tummy from the hand that wasn't washed, is v'chezin metamnes hayat shenitla. So mele, now so this water which became tummy from the other hand, nachamo. One hand was washed; it was completely washed. It was washed properly, and then the other hand, he went ahead and he rubbed both hands together, shifshuv, he did the shifshuv. So then, that hand that wasn't washed is mitami, the water which is on the hand that was washed, and the water that was on the hand that was washed is mitami the yadayim. That's v'cheiz, mitami sayat shenitlo. That's talking about when he was mishafshif the hand that was washed and the other hand which wasn't washed. So that other hand is tummy, so it's matame the mashke which is on this hand. However, shivshiva bereishe bekesel, he went ahead and rubbed it on his head, or he rubbed it on a wall, not on a hand. The hand is tummy, but the wall is not tummy, the head is not tummy. So then it is utera. So this yad, which he washed properly, is torah. Halacha vav, notel shtei yodav mishtifa achas. He washed b'chlal both hands together from one shtifa, from one pouring. He didn't pour on each one separately. He washed both hands in one pouring. Is arei loterim. That torah. No, there's no problem of washing on two hands together. It's just like there's no problem on washing on one hand, and then washing on this part of the hand and the other part of the hand. In other words, it's all one hand. So al derech when you take two hands together, so it's all one washing. Let's say the water that comes off a hand that's being washed is the chtame. So since lapel you're washing one hand and together you're washing the other hand, so maybe some of the water after you washed one hand fell on the second hand, but maybe that was being matami the second hand. We say no, since you're washing both hands together, it has it didn't like one hand, and memela they all become torah together. Now nachmer, that's talking about two hands of one person. Afilu arboy chamisha zebetz zeh. There's 4 or 5 people standing next to each other. Izeh al gavzeh, or you can have either the hands next to each other sideways, or you can have the hands on top of each other. There's one on top of the other. In other words, they have to keep their hands loose. That the water should come into their hands and should come into between all their fingers. So the fact that you're washing all the hands together, that's not a problem. Halacha zayin. Notal mixas yodi, if a person washes part of his hand, and then v'chazer v'hesev v'notal anishar miyodi, and then he washed the rest of his hand. In other words, he didn't wash his entire hand in one time. So the din is harei zu tmeik shaisa. You can't wash, just like you can't be toivel. You can't be toivel chatzoyin, you can't be toivel half of your body, and then go ahead and be toivel the other half of your body. You have to be toivel the entire body together. So al derech zeh, the netila has to be the entire hand together. Now that's only talking about it when you wash part of the hand, and that part of the hand became dry, and now you want to wash the other part of the hand. However, v'im adayin yesh al mikzeh shenotol betchila tifeach hamanas latfiach. In other words, if the part where you washed is still wet to the extent that if someone else is going to touch that wetness, he'll be able to make something else wet. That's tifeach hamanas latfiach. So then is arezu tehera. So then it is torah because it's considered that it was bebasachas. In other words, as long as the hand is still wet from the natila, so therefore it's considered a natila bebasachas. B'medvarim amurim, this whole din that it has to be a natila bebasachas, that's only b'mayim rishenim. Aval b'shniya, when we're talking about the second natila, is netel mitzvus yoda v'chezer v'mesiv al mikzosam. The mayim rishniyim, which are only there l'tayris or rishenim, it doesn't have that din that it has to be on the natila b'basachas. The mayim rishenim, which is to l'tayr hayodayim, the yadayim atmeis, and the mayim rishenim are coming l'tayr hayodayim. So over there, the din is that it has to be l'tayr the yodayim basachas. Mashenkin, the mayim shmiyim, which is not really coming to l'tayr hayodayim, it's coming to be l'tayr the mayim al yodayim. So over there, it's not neged that the tara of the mayim shal yodayim should be basachas. Halacha ches. Shir hamayim shnetul memtchila is a revius l'chol adam v'adam l'shtei yodayim. There has to be a revius for 2 hands of each person. So in other words, we learned before that you can have 2 people next to each other, and you're washing them both with one pouring. In other words, you're taking one keli and you're pouring once, and that's washing the 2 hands of 2 people, 4 hands. But there has to be a revius for each person. For each 2 hands, there has to be a revius. Ein pachas mishir zek mishabiyarna ben til sidayim lepas. Just like the gabi til sidayim lepas. So al derech zeh, which was benegeh chulin, al derech zeh, the din is always benegeh netil shidayim. That netil shidayim has to always be, the truma has to be that there should be a revius l'chol shtei yodayim. That's benegeh mayim rishenim. Aval mayim shniyim, but benegeh the mayim shniyim, which is a special din by truma, is yesh lishnayim little yedayim revius. 2 people could use 1 revius. 1 revius could be used as the mayim shniyim of 2 people. Umechatzilug, if you have if you have a chatzilug, which is 2 reviusim, so then you could do not only nesim l'shleishul arbo, you could use it for 3 people or 4 people. Umilug, and if you have a lug, it's afilu l'meir. So if a lug, somehow or another, this water which is coming on all of them together. So even though there's 100 people that are washing their hands mayim shniyim, they could all be washed from one lug. Why? Because she'ein hamayim hashniyim l'tayr el lahaver hamayim rishenim. So knows when you want to affect ta'ara, so there's a din that there has to be a revius in order to affect ta'ara. That's the din of the shir revius. The shir revius is not because you need a revius to cover the hands. The shir revius is because you need a revius to affect ta'ara. And since the mayim rishenim is to affect ta'ara on the yadayim, just like there's a shir of memsa by a mikveh, so al derech there's a shir of revius for netila. So, but mayim rishenim, which the purpose of it is netila, so just like we said before, that the netila has to be basachas, that's didn't want it has to be basachas, and al derech it has to be with the revius. Mashenk in the mayim shniyim, over there's no din of basachas, because over there it's only lahaver, it's only lahaver, the mayim rishenim, ein mayim shniyim l'tara, el lahaver mayim rishenim. So therefore there's no din that it has to be basachas, and al derech there's no shir. This shir of revius doesn't apply. See, so but it has to be practical. So if you have, you can have one revius, he says, for 2 people. If you have a half of a lug, so you can use it for 3 or 4 people. And if you have a lug, he says you can use it even for 100. Halacha tes. Keli shehoya be revius mayim kshem l'ntilas yadayim. And then v'nosim l'techi ma'at mayim psulim l'ntilas yadayim. So you have a keli which has mayim kshem l'ntilas yadayim, and that keli you also put a little bit mayim which are psulim l'ntilas yadayim. Abel lepel you have in it also a revius mayim of kshem l'ntilas yadayim, but you also have mayim which are psulim. So the din is arei l'ksherim. So this all this water together, the revius plus the psulim are kosher. However, notel min hakeli kishir shenosan, you took out of the keli the amount that you gave, that you put in. So now all you have left is only a revius of liquid. Now this revius of liquid is not all of mayim ksherim, because you started off with a revius of mayim ksherim, you added mayim psulim, and now you took out mayim as much as the mayim psulim that you put in. So bepashtus, since a liquid mixes, so bepashtus, what's left in the revius is the original revius minus some that you took out, plus a little bit that was left over from this mayim psulim, which is being mashed from the revius. V'nishal revius bilvat shoysa, is a psula. Why? If mayim psulim is shlim shir revius, and mayim psulim, which is a shlim shir revius, doesn't have dinner revius. In other words, the fact that it's bottle is only if you don't need it. Masha'inkim, to make it and to become mayim ksherim, it doesn't become mayim ksherim. Halacha yud, kol ha-mayim ha-psulim l'netila b'mayim rishelim, kachim psulim b'mayim shniyim. So there's all the dinim that we learned that there are differences in mayim rishelim and mayim shniyim. Because mayim rishelim has to be basachas, mayim rishelim has to be dafka revius, l'kol shtei yodayim, masha'inkim ha-mayim shniyim, we don't have this din. But on the other end, the type of water, a mayim which are psulim l'netila b'mayim rishelim, are also psulim b'mayim shniyim. And also, that's the number 1. And also, v'chol keli, she'en neitim imanu b'mayim rishenim, there's dinim of b'negeh the keli, which the Rambam discussed earlier in Hilchas Brachas. The keli that you could use for mayim rishenim is kach, ein neitim imanu mayim shniyim. Mayim shniyim also has to have that type of a keli, it has to be a kosher keli. Ksheim shetzorech liyas ha-mayim rishenim mikeach chodam is kach ha-mayim shniyim. So the Rambam is saying, even though there are differences in mayim rishenim and mayim shniyim, like we said, this has to be a revius l'chol echad v'yechad, and this has to be b'vasachas, masha'enkim ha'mayim shniyim, he doesn't have that din. But on the other end, as far as that it has to be mayim and not mayim psulim, as far that it has to be a keli kosher, and as far that it has to be a keach nesen, so that applies side to mayim rishenim and side to mayim shniyim. Halacha yudalef. Kvar b'yarnu b'perik shishim nehilchas brachas, kol mini ha'mayim apsulim tilas yadayim v'echsherim. Knows which mayim are apostle for the tilas yadayim, and which mayim are kosher, and v'chol ha'kelim sheneitim l'yadayim, which kelim you could use for yadayim, v'she'im neitlim, and which mayim you can't use, and v'eizin nesina hi mekech nesen u'ksheir. When do we say that nesina was mekech nesen? And knows, sometimes it comes mekech nesen, but not directly. So the question is it still considered mekech nesen? V'eizin nesina eina mekech nesen. When do we say that this nesina was mekech nesen upsula? V'chol eisen advarim shebiyarnu sham b'netilas yadayim lepas chulin, just like we spoke over there. Hilchas brachas, but again until yadayim lepas chulin, is kachem l'truma. That's the same din l'truma. So these dinim, all those dinim that are discussed in Hilchos Brachos, also apply here when the Rambam is speaking about the din of Netilas Yadayim l'truma, which over here by truma there's the din of Mayim Rishenim and Mayim Shneim. Kshem shekol safik yadayim teheres l'chul. So we learned before that safik yadayim. In other words, there's a safik if there's a problem with the yadayim. So it's teheres l'chul k'mishabiyanu sham. Is kachen l'truma. By truma is also the same din. Kol safik yadayim is Torah, because the whole din of Tumas Yadayim is a derabbanan. So Memela, even by truma it's a derabbanan. So Memela, so that part of the din derabbanan, the Rabbanan instituted that kol safik yadayim is Torah. Halacha Yud Beis, Dover, Borer, Vigoli, Sha'atumas v'atares, Gzeres HaKosovei. Ve'enon midvorim shel daiti shel odem achrate. V'areim b'chlal ha'chukim. It's not something which is a seichel dikazach that a person could understand on his own or has an understanding in it. This is something which is Gzeres HaKosov, the whole musik of Tumah v'tara. V'chein ha'tfilim and ha'tumas, the fact that through being toivel and ha'tumah, you become Torah is also Gzeres HaKosov. That's mechlal ha'chukim. She'ein ha'tumah tit itzeya shetabru b'mayim. Elexeris HaKosovi. Then the Rambam is Vahadover Toli b'Kavanas Halev. Vahadover Toli b'Kavanas Halev that in order for the tefillah to be a proper tefillah is Toli b'Kavanas Halev Leficha Chomru Chacham Tovel v'Lehuchzek Ki'ilu Le'Tovel. If a person was stable and he wasn't Huchzek, didn't have Kavanah for tefillah, so then that's considered that he is if he wasn't stable. That's how Rashi teaches in Chagiga the teach of Lehuchzek. Tovel v'Lehuchzek Ki'ilu Le'Tovel. And that din has been again my Shisheni. You notice, but on a Menatera level, the pashtus is a person is stable, so he was in the table. So lepel, mashla isha lebaila, the lebaila is muteres, even there was no kavana. And legabi chulin also it's without kavana. But lepel, there's a din, like certain things, even legabi ma'aser sheni, and all that is legabi truma, legabi kochim, you need a special kavana that the tefillah should be l'shem this inyan. Tovel v'lehuzah ki'ilu le'tovel. So the Rambam is saying behemshech al Gzeres HaKosovi, the whole musik of Tumah v'Tara and Tefillah is Gzeres HaKosovi. And now the Rambam is adding Vahadover Toli b'Kavanas Halev uleficha Chomru Chacham Tovel v'lehuchzak ki'ilu le'tovel. Now it says, so even though it's Gzeres HaKosov, is afal pikein remez yesh b'dover. Kshem sham mechavan libe l'tayr. Person wants to make himself Torah. Is kivin shetovel Torah. Afal b'shul neschadish begufei dover. Nothing happened really physically. Just that the fact that he was mechaven litor and he was table, that causes the tara. Is kacha mechaven libe litar nafshe mitumas hanefoshes. A person wants to be metayr libe. It was hard from mitumas hanefoshes shehein machshvei sa'ovin v'deis harois. All the deis harois which Rambam discussed earlier in Hilchos Deis, also things which are deis rois, which that causes that causes the heder hatara of nafshe. He wants to litar nafshe. Mitumis hanefoshes shei machshvis ha'oven v'deis harois is kivin shehiskim belibe lifresh me'esun ha'etzes. No, that's the kavanas halev that he's talking about. He was hiskim belibe lifresh me'esun ha'etzes and v'hevi nafshei b'mei hadas, and he brought himself b'mei hadas is Torah. So everyone said that mei hadas haTorah Torah, b'mei hadas haTorah Torah. There knows that it's just twice it says Torah. Then the Rebbe at different times said that it could be that Me'adas is Bepashtus, not Me'adas HaTorah Torah. Me'adas is Bepashtus, Me'adas means the Me'adas of Torah, and through that is Torah. The Rebbe was like, it seemed to be like, it was Chayzer from that Ha'ara that the Rebbe had a Ha'ara on the Girsa of the Rambam. But I'll quote upon him, Ve'hevi nafshe b'Me'adas is Torah. Hariweime v'zerakti aleichem, Mayim teirem utahartem, mikiltem yisechem, mikol gilulechem atayr eschem. So again, this is the musik. The Rambam is saying that there's the remes that through the fact that a person is mechaven to be metayr himself, and lepel he brings himself in the me'adas, so through that is Torah. Now the Maisa is just interesting that there's a musik called Tefillah, which is a deraisa dikadin. That there's a musik of Tumah v'Tara, and then there's a din of Tefillah, and then there's another din that Kavanas Halev, the pashtus Kavanas Halev is not on the deraisa dikah level. That's part of the din of Tefillah. The Rambam, from the Hemshech Halosh of the Ram sounds Elexeris HaKosovi, and then the Ram continues Vadover Toli b'Kavanas Halev. That it sounds like as if Kavanas Halev is a psadiraisa dikeinyan, because the whole limud that the Ram is learning out of it, that when a person wants to be mechavan libe, retired nafshe, and that is nichnas atzmi me'adas haTorah is Torah. So l'chura, this inyan of Kavanas Halev seems to be very, very essential in this limud over here. But on the other hand, l'chura on a pashtus dikalevet, So I'm saying l'chura tzarchian a little bit. On the pashtistic level, kavanas halev is only on a derivatical level. It's not on a derisical level. But I'll call upon the Ram brings this pasuk. Harayuema zerakta alechem haim teirim utahartem mikiltem yisechem mikol gulelechem atar eschem Hashem berachma v'rabim mikol chet ovin v'ashma yitarenu amen. Slikulu hilchas mikvois b'seyayta d'shmaya brich rachmona d'saya. Then at certain Rambams, I'm not sure if this is part of the Lashon Ram. The Ram says Nigmar Sefer Asiri be'ez shindal yud u'mi prokim shel Sefer zeh meir v'arbo v'arboim hilchas tumas mes chamisha v'esem prokim hilchas paradum v'chamisha asa prokim hilchas tumas sarah shisha asa prokim hilchas metam mishkal v'meshav shleish asa prokim hilchas shar avis atumis esem prokim hilchas tumas echlon shisha asa prokim hilchas kelim shmeina v'esem prokim and hilchas mikvois achad asa prokim. Mir Hashem, tomorrow we'll start Sefer Nezikim.